You are looking at the U.S. Capitol building tonight, home of the U.S. Congress. After the most contentious midterm elections in recent history, the Democrats will now win control of the House, and the Republicans will hang on to the Senate. But what does that mean? What does a divided Congress mean for the president?
More constitutional judges, lower taxes, less regulation, to make certain that we build the wall.
We have a president of the United States who is a pathological liar.
This was an election about hope and about the future, and the people of Texas rendered a verdict that we want a future with more jobs and more security and more freedom.
Marsha Blackburn, Bernie Sanders, and Ted Cruz they were all winners in their respective Senate races tonight. But what will it all mean for the Democrats for the next 2 years and beyond?
Thanks to you, we owned the ground. Thanks to you. Thanks to you, tomorrow will be a new day in America.
I'm down in Tennessee, which remains Trump country tonight.
I'm in our Toronto studio tracking results.
And I'm in Vancouver looking at stories on this side of the border, including a shocking announcement from a former Conservative cabinet minister. This is The National. And let's begin with that developing political story on this side of the border. Ontario Conservative MP Tony Clement is stepping aside from many of his duties on Parliament Hill. Power and Politics host Vashi Kapelos is in Ottawa. And Vashi, this has been a stunning announcement. It broke just a few hours ago. And at this point in the evening, what do we know?
Yeah, really sending shockwaves throughout Ottawa. What Tony Clement has admitted, as you said earlier this evening, through a statement was that he sent sexually explicit photos of himself and a video to someone he thought was a consenting female recipient. Those are his words, not mine. The woman at hand, or whomever it was, he says then tried to extort 50,000 euros from him in exchange for not publishing or not making public those photos. He took the case to the RCMP, and then he told the Conservatives. As a result, as you mentioned, he's stepping away from his duties on Parliament Hill, which means he'll no longer act as the Conservative Shadow Minister for Justice. He will also step away from the committees that he serves on, and he says that he is seeking treatment. I'll read what the statement that he provided, part of it at least. I recognize now, he writes, that I have gone down a wrong path and have exercised very poor judgment. I am committed to seeking the help and treatment I need in my personal life to make sure this will not happen again, while also continuing to discharge my duties as a member of Parliament. Now, no word beyond this statement from Mr. Clement. We don't know how long that treatment will take, what form it will take. We also don't know what it will take for him to resume his duties on Parliament Hill. We expect at least some of those answers, or at least the questions, will be asked tomorrow morning when Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Federal Conservative Party, is set to address reporters. Ian?
All right, Vashi, thank you very much. And I'll be back a little later in the hour with some of the other stories that have been unfolding here in this country. But first, back to Rosie in Toronto with the latest on the midterms.
Yeah, that's right, Ian. And sure, the way things unfolded tonight is pretty much what was expected. But let's take a deeper look at what that Democratic House win means, what it means in terms of trade, economics, what it means for this country. Let's dig into the numbers first with Andrew.
Yeah, so Rosie, the Republicans, as we've said, will maintain their control of the Senate, but not only were Democrats unable to make key gains, they were knocked down in states that they were trying to hold. Then you've got the House, where we will see change. The Democrats will control the lower chamber, and they'll have done it by picking up key seats in Pennsylvania, in New York, but also in the Midwest and even the South. Lots to digest, so let me take you through some of the key races that got us to this point. Now, in the Senate, Republicans had the edge from the very start. Most seats in play were theirs for the taking. Democrats were defending, and that was a tall order because so many of those seats weren't so blue anymore. They'd become Trump country when he swept into office in 2016. And then any notion of winning control of the Senate evaporated when the results from North Dakota came in. That's what you're seeing. The Democrats, that was the Democrats' second projected loss in the Senate. And while they were losing seats, they couldn't make the key gains they needed. Remember, they needed to hold everything and then steal seats. They pinned plenty of hopes on Texas, which was, for a time tonight, very exciting. Beto O'Rourke had a close call, occasionally pulling out in front of incumbent Senator Ted Cruz, but in the end, a seat the Democrats had hoped to gain stayed red. Let's turn to the House. Texas, again, sure kept things interesting. Take a look at a key district that flipped. Texas 32. Former NFL linebacker Colin Allred beat Republican incumbent Pete Sessions, turning it from red to blue. And who knows, even if Beto O'Rourke didn't win his Texas Senate race, all the buzz around him may have energized voters who saw his name on the ticket, and maybe not just his name, but then other Democrats as well. So through southern districts like that and Iowa 1, which we've got here, a Midwestern seat Democrats managed to take from the Republicans. It all adds up to a victory in the House for Democrats and a loss there for Republicans.
Okay, so we know the Democrats have retaken the House of Representatives. It was always a possibility. What does it mean? Earlier, we reached out to Mark Harkins of the Government Affairs Institute in Washington. He walked us through what to watch for with this shift of power.
Our last three presidents have all faced a situation that sometime during their presidency, they lost control, their party lost control of the House of Representatives. And essentially what happens at that point is their legislative program goes off the rails. If they don't have the majority in the House or the Senate, they can't push through what their agenda is. The agenda that President Trump would wish to put forward would be derailed. So you wouldn't hear talk about a wall anymore. You probably might not hear about Space Force. These type of things would be the first and foremost. There's a whole organization called the Government Accountability Office. There are about 3,000 people whose job is to look at what different government agencies are doing. And they respond to requests from members of Congress because they are part of the legislative branch. But they respond to requests from chairmen first. So in this case, right now, all the chairmen are Republicans. So the Government Accountability Office isn't necessarily being asked to look at things which are looking at the accountability of what current activities are happening. So if the Democrats were to take over, you'd expect that those requests would start to roll in. The witches would be in control of his witch hunt, as far as he would be concerned. I mean, you would see, the document requests that would come across. And the information that he would need to provide, because Congress, as a co-equal branch of government, has the right to certain documents. I mean, the president can protect some things by presidential privilege, but very few.
Our Washington correspondent Keith Bogue is in studio with us now. All right, so it's been a big night. Let's talk first about the Democrats and what this means for them going forward, whether it be 2020 or how they're going to handle themselves starting tomorrow.
Okay, well, I mean, there were some disappointments for them tonight, but the big story is that they now have a lever of power in Washington, something that they have not had for 2 years. And it's been a miserable 2 years for them without that, okay? So they've settled that one, and they've got to be pleased about that. What it means is that they can apply a level of accountability to the president that was not being applied to him by Republicans when they held control of the House, and that could make for a very difficult life for Donald Trump. But on top of that, it also affords Democrats a platform on which to define themselves. They have the ability, excuse me, they have the ability to propose legislation on, say, immigration reform if they want to. It would be defeated in the Senate. But nevertheless, they would have defined themselves rather than have their opposition define them on that issue, as we've seen the president do. So it's very important.
So they have to strike that balance, though, between going after the president, something that they haven't had a chance to do with any real power before, and then making sure that they can sort of shape things for 2020, because that's what they're going to be working on starting tomorrow.
Yeah, and they seem to understand the need to do that during the election campaign, where they made the key item of their campaign agenda healthcare, and not the president. They understood that the president was somebody that was well understood by the voting public, whether they liked him, whether they hated them, but that it was important for Democrats to say that they stood for something besides just opposing the president. So they know that lesson, but it might be more difficult to do while they're in power, because they'll be under a lot of pressures from Democrats who would want to see them be as tough on the president as possible.
Okay, Keith, thanks for that. I appreciate it. CBC's Keith Bogue here with me in studio. CBC News is also in some key battlegrounds, and those stories have been playing out through the evening. Adrienne is in one of them. She is in Tennessee again tonight.
You bet, Rosie. We're right here in the heart of the conservative South. We'll talk to our reporters on the ground in Pennsylvania and California a little later in the show, but let's start with Florida. This state everyone seems to watch every time there's an election. it's always a key to a U.S. election. So every last vote counts. Incredibly tight in these races for governor and the Senate in Florida. Paul Hunter is in Tallahassee watching all of this unfold. So, Paul, Andrew Gillum just took to the stage. What did he have to say?
He conceded, and then this place emptied out fast. What everybody thought was going to be a, boisterous victory party turned out to be quite the opposite. Signals along that line were evident quite early on. It was a close race, but indeed, Andrew Gillum, in a contest that was really framed as a, micro referendum on the government and the policies and the actions of Donald Trump. A lot of people thought this was the guy. Florida was going to say statewide, no, we want something different. They didn't. And Andrew Gillum came out a few minutes ago and conceded. Here's a little bit of that speech.
I called Mr. Ron DeSantis and congratulated him on what we expect will be him as the next governor of the great state of Florida. But I want you to know that in spite of our congratulating him on his victory this evening, nothing that we believe in is compromised.
He went on to, remind people, without not in so many words, but effectively saying what a lot of Democrats feared in circumstances like this, when there was a statewide contest that Democrats might have expected to win and did not. Reminded people here tonight that there are more elections to come, not to give up hope for change. And they got to keep their spirits up. They ought not sort of wallow in sorrow over this and become disinterested in politics or disinterested in the kind of things that Gillum was trying to push forward. Tonight happened, but 2020 ain't so far away.
Oh, there's a sobering thought. All right, noteworthy, Paul, that Ted Cruz managed to hold on to his seat in the Senate. You covered that race in Texas. What do you make of that result?
Yeah, that was another one that Democrats had high hopes for. They really liked Beto Cruz. I think secretly they thought, man, this is going to be tough, and that was borne out tonight. Interesting to note that Republicans who went out tonight and voted for a Republican governor looked at that same ballot and quite often chose not to vote for Ted Cruz and may well have voted for Beto. Wasn't enough in the end. Beto did far more, I think, than anybody would have expected any Democrat to do in that state. But it wasn't enough. It's a reminder there are a lot of Republicans in this country, certainly a lot in Texas, but equally so here in Florida. Reminders that, as we talk about a divided country, polarized country, there are a lot of Republicans who made their voices heard tonight in certain places.
Okay, Paul Hunter in Tallahassee. Thanks, Paul. Let's head over now to Pennsylvania. This is another really important state. Trump won there back in the 2016 election. Stephen D'Souza is, of course, in Philadelphia tonight, tracking why it could be a different story this evening. So, Stephen, some people were hoping that the Democrats would make a big impact in Pennsylvania. Who did you see driving their support today?
Well, it's interesting, Pennsylvania up until this point had no women in the House of Representatives. They've now sent 4, and Mary Gay Scanlon is one of them. She was just delivering her victory speech. One of the people helping drive that vote is Jayatri Das with Moving the Needle, one of the grassroots groups. What do you think about the work you've done and what happens next?
This is really just the beginning. It's so exciting to have elected a slate of candidates who are just more representative of who our community is. But now we have to do the work to make sure that we're fighting for equal rights, we're fighting for health care, we're fighting for justice.
With the Democrats now controlling the House, what do you want to see on a national level from a Democrat-controlled House?
We want to see that legislation to protect our health care, to protect civil rights, and also to start investigating some of the corruption that we're seeing signs of in the administration. Because with all three branches of government being controlled by Republicans, they've really abdicated that responsibility.
And just finally, we've heard a lot about civility. Can Democrats and Republicans talk to each other? How do you work with the other side going forward?
We've been doing that throughout this whole campaign. We've been having conversations door to door, voter to voter, and people want that kind of conversation. So it's exciting to have candidates who value that.
Excellent, thank you very much. So there you get a sense of the passion, but also a sense from people here that the work isn't quite done. You know, they're already looking forward to 2020 and the work ahead for that.
All right, that's Stephen D'Souza in Philadelphia tonight. So the next place we absolutely need to go is Washington, D.C. Lindsay Duncombe is outside the White House, where, you know, there's someone in that building who's watching this race more closely than anyone else in the country. So, Lindsay, I gather there is the very first reaction from the West Wing. What's being said?
Some of that reaction we're actually hearing, Adrian, from inside the White House, not where reporters are allowed to go tonight. But there have been a couple of key moments when we've heard cheers so loud they filtered over to where we're standing. One of those moments was when DeSantis was declared the governor in Florida, a big win for Donald Trump. Another one was when Fox said that Tennessee, that Senate race, would be won by the Republicans. Those moments on cable television made it, there were cheers so loud in the White House, they filtered over to where we're standing. Of course, this is likely a mixed result for the president. He is looking at having to deal with a House controlled by Democrats. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was out here speaking to reporters. She was asked about what that would mean for the president's agenda. Here's what she said.
The president's agenda isn't going to change regardless of whose party is there. We're still going to be an administration that's focused on lowering the taxes, growing our economy, creating jobs, defeating ISIS, remaking the judiciary, fixing the tremendous opioid crisis that we have. I think we can work with Democrats on that.
So certainly challenges for dealing with the new House coming in, but not a surprise, Adrian, that the White House is declaring victory.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. That's Lindsay Duncombe outside the White House, where you know all the televisions are on. So right now, let's send it back to Rosie in studio.
And in fact, the president has just tweeted after 8 hours of restraining himself from his favorite platform. He did tweet just a minute ago, quote, "Tremendous success tonight. Thank you to all." I guess not surprising that he would claim success, given that's what he likes to do. Let's, if we can, with our panel of insiders, David Frum, Patty Solis, Doyle, Jay Shabria, and Keith Bogue. Let's just talk about what this means for America going forward. Keith has spent a lot of time doing stories. I at least did one story about how people feel divided, like they feel pulled apart. They feel the rhetoric is turned up too high. They don't know how they're going to meet in the middle. There doesn't seem to be an atmosphere of compromise. Does that change after tonight, or does it get worse? What would be your best guess, Keith?
I think it's probably more likely to get worse. I think that the nature of this president is that by his day-to-day actions, he imposes politics on people who don't want politics imposed on them. It's taking up too much space in their lives. And it doesn't have to be this way. They know that. So I think we're going to get a continuation of that, maybe times 2 or 3 or 10 or something like that.
So he ratchets up because he is now under
He always
pressure.
ratchets up when he's on the defensive. And what this means tonight is that he's going to be on the defensive in a way he has not been since he was inaugurated.
But that doesn't make me very hopeful for the American people. Yeah.
The point about Keith's point about ratcheting is very shrewd because the president now faces a very fearsome and dangerous temptation. With this expanded majority in the Senate, he has to be tempted to fire his attorney general and replace him with someone more malleable, pliable, believing that the president can now get a pliant confirmation hearing. And if he gets a new attorney general, then he can bypass the independent-minded deputy attorney general and then get his hands around Robert Mueller's neck. And that has to be a temptation to the president. As to the question of whether the country is divided, I mean, the Democrats are going to have, it looks like, a 10-point popular vote margin. That doesn't look like, yes, that's a division, but it's not a 50-50 division.
No.
No.
No,
but it's a deep division.
Yes.
Yes.
And they don't seem to be meeting in the middle. The people, as you've pointed out, Jay, who like Trump, and they aren't the same people that
they're not coming over.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing, too. Are things going to get worse? Yeah, I think they are, and I think Keith's right. And it's not just what's going on in Washington. It's also what's going on when we watch TV in America, the cable news networks are going to have a field day with these hearings. And if we thought it was going to be bad now, I mean, my goodness, when everything we're going to see is a gavel and hearings, they're going to be playing for their ratings all the time, and it's just going to deepen those divisions.
I think what's somewhat disconcerting about tonight's results, particularly in the Senate, is, just 2 weeks ago in America, we had some incidents of domestic terrorism. We had a pipe bomber send pipe bombs to Democratic officials. We had a shooting at a synagogue, and the country was mourning, and the country was in distress. And the president, rather than take a more healing tone and bring people together, he escalated. He escalated at these rallies in the final week of the campaign. And as much as it, bothers me to say it, in many of those states where he campaigned, Republicans won on his escalation. And that's, like I said, it's disturbing.
Yeah.
He will take the lesson, what,
My
David?
guess is that what he's going to try to do, because remember, he's not a very strategic person. He's not very realistic about himself. So his first move is going to be to try to reach out and do business with the Democrats, because he thinks he's way more beloved than he is, and he thinks he's way better at deal-making than he is. Yes. So that'll be first move. Then it will fail. And then he will do his second move, which is to escalate the racial provocation. And there will be more of that. And all of that will be taking place against the background of a softening economy in 2019. Yeah. And that's what the financial markets were telling us in October. Yes. And perhaps the beginnings of recession in 2020.
Okay, we're going to put you all on pause and come back to you in a little bit, but lots of good stuff to think about there. We'll be checking in with our panel, of course, throughout the evening as our special coverage continues here on The National. All the analysis and some context you need to make sense of tonight's vote.
And we're also working on several other stories playing out here in Canada. The family of Rosemary Jr., who was fatally stabbed in a Shoppers Drug Mart, is reeling tonight after her killer was found not criminally responsible.
She's sick, yes. Look after her. But leave her inside here. Give her the sentence.
As victims, for the family, for us, there's no justice.
Anger and frustration today from the family of Rosemary Jr. She was fatally stabbed by a stranger during a busy afternoon in Toronto's business district 3 years ago. A judge says her attacker was mentally ill at the time and didn't understand the difference between right and wrong. Olivia Stefanovic was in court.
Wearing an image to keep the memory alive of her youngest, Rosemary Jr.'s mom called out the system that found her daughter's killer not criminally responsible.
Don't let her out, because it will be in danger to the public outside. You never know, just like how this happened with my daughter, right? It could happen with somebody else.
Jr. was 28, a newlywed browsing through the makeup section of a drugstore in Toronto's underground shopping district when she was randomly stabbed in the chest in December 2015 by Rohini Bisesar, a complete stranger. Multiple psychiatrists assessed Bisesar and all came to the same conclusion. Bisesar suffered from delusional thoughts, hallucinations, all due to severe, untreated schizophrenia.
There is no win. There's no successful outcome here. No matter what, Ms. Jr. has died. She cannot be brought back. It is the saddest thing.
A judge agreed that Bisesar was incapable of knowing what she did was legally and morally wrong. Although Jr.'s family decried the verdict,
recent decision of our
legal experts say it was the right call.
You have to accept it as the right result, because you cannot in our society punish someone who doesn't have the mental capacity to judge right and wrong.
Since Jr.'s death, Bisesar has been receiving treatment and is being held in a secure unit for women at a mental health facility until a review board decides when she is fit to be released, following what the judge described as a senseless and motiveless killing. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Toronto.
Turning to Saskatchewan now, the first province in Canada to introduce legislation that would allow police to tell people if their partner has a violent past. As Bonnie Allen reports, it was inspired by a law in the UK.
When Claire Wood broke up with her boyfriend, he threatened her repeatedly. The British woman reported him, but police weren't allowed to tell her about his violent past.
Unknown to us, he'd already done 6 years in prison for holding a lady at knife point for 12 hours.
Wood was strangled and burned to death. Her father, Michael Brown, campaigned for Clare's Law, enacted 6 years ago in the UK. It allows police to disclose a perpetrator's criminal record, something that's usually confidential to his or her partner upon request.
My daughter was a clever kid. Had she known what she'd let herself in for, I think she would have been out there so fast it would have made your eyes water.
Now, Saskatchewan, the province with the worst rates of domestic violence and homicide in Canada, has introduced a similar bill.
The request could be made from either a potential victim, a friend or relative. The information wouldn't necessarily go to them. It would go to the potential victim. So that's part of the protocol.
A protocol still being hammered out with the Privacy Commissioner. There are concerns that police will release too much information or not enough. In the UK, Greater Manchester Police denied more than half of all requests last year.
We have questions. Will it include all police occurrence reports? Will it include charges if they were dropped?
Amy Campbell's boyfriend killed her son Camden in a drunken rage.
If people can hurt and kill others, why should their stuff be kept private? I don't think that it's something that should be kept private. People need to be aware of these offenders.
Her ex was convicted of manslaughter.
If you've done it once, I just feel that you could do it again easily. So I'm scared for whoever may end up with him.
Campbell doesn't know whether Clare's Law would have saved her son's life, but hopes it will save others. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Regina.
And a couple of other Canadian stories we're following tonight. Former Quebec Premier Bernard Landry has died at the age of 81. He was premier for just 2 years, from 2001 to 2003, but after quitting politics, he remained one of the biggest advocates for Quebec independence. He once famously mocked the Canadian flag, calling it bits of red rag. Landry had been ill. He'll be honored with a state funeral.
This is a hiccup, but I think guys have made a great effort to repair relationships.
Some members of the Ottawa Senators faced the media this morning after this video of some of their teammates was posted online. An Uber driver in Arizona recorded 7 players criticizing their team and one of their coaches. They have since apologized, saying it was a private conversation recorded without their knowledge nor consent. Uber says the recording violated its terms of service, but under Arizona privacy laws, it appears making this recording was legal. And now back to Rosemary in our studio in Toronto, and what has been a night of some very interesting analysis, Rosie.
Yeah, it sure has, Ian. Here's where we've ended up at the end of it. The Democrats have won the House. The Republicans held the Senate. So it's a split Congress, and that could indeed complicate Donald Trump's presidency for the next couple of years. Let's go to Andrew now to walk us through how we got here on both those fronts, Andrew.
Yeah, so why don't we start, Rosie, in the Senate? Truth be told, Democrats started off on the wrong foot from the get-go. I mentioned before how their only hope was to defend all states where they have senators and then try to pick up a few more seats. But look at Indiana. The incumbent Democrat, Joe Donnelly's loss, that was among the first projected by the U.S. networks. And he was fighting uphill from the start. This is Trump country. And by the way, it's Vice President Mike Pence's home state, too. Then take a look at Missouri, a state that was once reliably blue, but that's been increasingly trending red. The U.S. networks are projecting that Republican challenger Josh Hawley will win against Democratic incumbent Claire McCaskill. Like Democrats across the U.S., she campaigned mostly on health care issues. Problem is, the Republican candidate campaigned on health care, too. Hawley also hammered McCaskill for her vote against the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. So that's likely not something that helped her tonight. So you might say the Senate story was written early this evening, but the House was a wilder ride. So look at New York's 19th congressional district. It's got its first ever non-white representative. Antonio Delgado is a Rhodes Scholar, a Harvard Law graduate, and the Republican incumbent, John Fasso's strategy of trying to attack Delgado for an earlier stint as a rapper, trying to paint him as being unfit for office because of some of his old lyrics, it seemed to backfire. And so tonight, you have Delgado, but also a host of new faces, new Democrats, who will soon be starting work in the House.
All right. Thanks for that, Andrew. Our Washington correspondent, Keith Bogue, is here with us to give us some perspective on what we've seen tonight. Keith, let's ask, I'm going to ask you about the Democrats and sort of what message they should take from tonight with this win, this claiming of the House. Maybe not by as big a margin as they wanted, but it's certainly a victory. So what can they walk away with tonight?
Well, I think that to the extent that they understood how important it was to talk about issues and not attack, just base their whole campaign on attacking Donald Trump. I think that's an important lesson, that there was a resonance to that they picked the right issue to spend the money on, healthcare. And healthcare is an issue that they should want to be identified with, and that's going to be important in 2020 as well. So I think that's an important lesson for them there. I think that, there's a lesson for everyone in terms of the result and the imbalance between the seat harvest, as they call it, and the actual popular vote. It is enormous. And it is a problem for Democrats that they're not going to be able to fix between now and 2020. But they have to recognize how much harder they have to work because of that.
And they have to probably...
I don't mean harder than this election.
Yes,
I just mean harder than the other side.
Yeah. And I guess part of that is also getting the vote out. And there was a huge effort to get out people that wouldn't normally, and we don't know all the numbers yet, but to get out people that wouldn't necessarily vote in midterms, which typically have much lower voter turnout anyway.
Not only do they have lower voter turnout, but they have particularly lower voter turnout for Democrats.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be clear evidence that they have overcome that to a significant degree when we see what the final numbers.
But that will also be a message, I guess, for them in the presidential, like in 2020, that if they want to win, they have to make sure that those people who don't typically show up or feel marginalized or even suppressed, their vote gets suppressed, that those people have to come out.
Yeah, and I think they'll be interested to know, to the extent that they can, how many first-time voters they got out.
Yeah, how many of those young people showed up. Okay. With some Democratic wins tonight, there are also some big historical firsts. Rashida Tlaib in Michigan and Ilhan Omar in Minnesota became the first Muslim women to be elected to U.S. Congress. Sharice Davids beat out incumbent GOP representative Kevin Yoder to be the first Native American congresswoman, very first. And Colorado elected the country's first openly gay man to be governor, Jared Polis. We have a lot more special coverage for you straight ahead here on The National. What should you take away from the results so far? Our panel of insiders standing by. We'll tackle that next. First, though, as we go to break, we asked some of you about our biggest trading partner, our friend, our neighbor, Canada, the U.S., and the state of politics. Here's what you had to say.
U.S. politics is a whole different game than in Canada. They have a system that is supposed to be run by the people. But I think the current leader they have right now is trying to prove otherwise.
To feel sorry for those people because the president is kind of a, what do you call it, racist or something? Or whatever you want to call it.
He's just like, if he hates you, he's going to do something. It's not about the betterment of America, but it's just like a personal grudge.
Also Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and the health care of 130 million Americans living with pre-existing medical conditions. Let's hear it more for pre-existing medical conditions.
That's Nancy Pelosi, who has clinched her seat tonight and will likely want to take on the job as the new Speaker of the House of Representatives. The Democrats have won that House back. She is a strong figure inside the Democratic Party, and to talk about that and more about the results and what we should read into them are U.S. political insiders who have been guiding us through the evening, along with our own Keith Bogue, David Frum, Patty Solis Doyle, and Jay Chabria. Jay Chabria. There we go. Okay, let's talk about Pelosi quickly. Whether there's a likelihood of her becoming Speaker of the House and what that could mean. Jay?
Well, I think it's likely she's Speaker. I don't see who else is out there that can challenge her. But and I'll tell you what, Republicans are chomping at the bit for her to return to the speakership. When you look at polling, and even though polling is completely broken, when you look at it, Republicans try to tie her to everything. It doesn't matter what it is. And if she has a speaker's gavel once again, she's relevant. and then she's the scary boogeyman. And that galvanizes the base more than anything else I've seen.
Yeah, and Donald Trump already does attack her.
They do.
Not as much as Hillary Clinton, but they do. So, do you think that's likely, or what would be the danger there for Democrats of doing that?
Nancy Pelosi is wildly effective. I don't think she gets half the credit she deserves. But, you know, let's look at the people who won tonight, Democrats. Many of them said they would not support her for Speaker in order to win their races. So that tells you something right there. Look, I'm all about winning, the Democrats winning in 2020, and if she's any kind of a hindrance, then I think it's time for somebody new.
Look, one of the lessons of tonight is Democrats do well when they empower women, more than 100 women in the House. But another lesson for tonight is Democrats have a rotation problem. It is hard for them to produce new generations of leadership. And when you look at their 2020 mentions, I mean, look how familiar they are. I agree with you that she was a very effective speaker and she doesn't get enough credit. One way to get credit is to retire. And then they give you a wonderful dinner and they name a building after you.
And a nice watch.
Maybe a statue. And then you open the way for someone else to be wildly effective, because no human being is wildly effective forever. God didn't make us that way.
And if we just pull back on that without going into Nancy Pelosi's future, Keith, there is a message there for Democrats too about tonight in terms of what success is for them. And maybe it's part of the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, but maybe it's something else they need to focus on moving forward too.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can separate Nancy Pelosi out of the entire conversation because I think she is so important, as everybody I think here has acknowledged. But look, she said she wants the gavel back, but she'll hand it back to someone else before the next election. I assume she's being honest and straightforward about that. I think that might be actually a useful thing for her to have the gavel for a while, because I don't think there is an obvious line of succession. And I think this is a caucus that needs to get to know who it is personally and understand who has the talent, what the generation looks like, and not be forced into doing something foolish, because Republicans make arguments about how effective she is for them motivating their base.
Right.
But I think it's pretty clear that they don't want to go into the next election with her.
Okay, what would be the first thing you would expect a Democratic House to do, whether from a legislative policy point of view or from an attack on Trump or an accountability on Trump? David would prefer that word. David, you go first.
Well, the first things they do are not necessarily the most important things they do.
No.
But one of the very first things they do is to say, let's test that 1924 statute that says the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee can call the Secretary of the Treasury and say, I want to see the tax return of any single American, and the American I'm interested in is President Trump. And see if that law, and see if the Trump administration fights that law, as they will, if it goes to the Supreme Court. That's probably one of the early orders of business.
What do you think, Patty? What would be one of the first things or one of the more important things they might do?
Well, they've already started working. I mean, Democratic House members, particularly the new heads of the committees, have already been putting together a list of investigations that they're going to impose. Now, whether that's a smart thing or not a smart thing, they've already started to do it. But what I also think what happens next is tomorrow morning, the 2020 race begins in earnest. And everyone who's considering running for the Democratic nomination in 2020 is going to devour the exit polls, devour, every bit of information that they can from this race.
Jay, what would you expect a Democratic House to do?
I think what they'll do is they'll start to go with the hearings and those types of things. What they ought to do, in my opinion, is they should start to worry about policy and try to come up with their own plans for immigration reform so they can actually show people that they're not for open borders, which is what the president says they are, that they're not for citizenship on demand. And also, I think they should try to get an infrastructure bill passed. If they can do those types of things, then they'll show that they're actually a governing party, and that portends good things for them in 2020.
Presumably, they can walk and chew gum. You would hope.
Yeah, not everyone can, though, and we've seen that in the past. But I think all those answers are the correct ones. I think MSNBC is reporting tonight that they have already said our first order of business will be to go after the tax returns. But I think it's urgent for them to get control of the immigration issue because it's being framed by their opposition, and it is a millstone that they can fix now. That they can come up with some idea of what comprehensive immigration reform looks like
In
and be
fairness,
defeated
though,
on it, but at least make the
In
point.
fairness, though, there was compromise legislation
Oh, yes,
presented to the
absolutely.
president, and the
Yes.
president moved the goalpost on it.
Yeah.
For the very reason, because he wants to dominate on this issue. But in fairness, Democrats came to the table.
Well, I wonder if now they could come back. I wonder if now, I don't know that the president would compromise, but could Democrats come back with something that might be palatable to him now?
But they have to, though. See, that's the thing. So regardless if they came to the table before or not, they've been outmaneuvered on this. They have to come forward on something,
Yes.
otherwise they will be forever defined on this issue.
Okay, but the question then is, does the president have to consider anything, David?
Well, the question is, does anybody actually want a deal? Deals are very difficult to achieve if only one party wants it, and they're impossible to achieve if neither party wants it. And my suspicion is that the status quo, which doesn't serve America, serves the parties well, because it creates heartrending scenes at the border that strengthen the Democratic base, but it also backs the Democrats into, as Jay said, a very extreme position where there's no kind of enforcement that they can tolerate, and that strengthens the president. So both parties are, trapped in a situation that doesn't serve the country.
Last word to you on that then, Keith.
Well, I think that it's possible to come up with all of these things and never get a deal, but still have managed to define yourself to the electorate in a much clearer way than they were defined before this election.
Okay. Good analysis. Thanks, everybody. More special coverage ahead here on The National. As we go to break, though, let's hear from Ted Cruz, re-elected in Texas tonight.
This election wasn't about me, and it wasn't about Beto O'Rourke. This election was a battle of ideas. It was a contest for who we are and what we believe. It was a contest, and the people of Texas decided this race.
All right, welcome back to Nashville. Republicans have won Tennessee's Senate seat on their way to majority in the Senate. And of course, Democrats, it appears, have won the House. So we want to take you to an important state now, California. That's where Democrats tried to wrestle away Republican House seats, including in Orange County. And that is precisely where we find Kim Brunherbert.
Well, Adrian, if you'd asked these Republicans 10 years ago whether the Democrats would be able to flip one seat in Orange County, the idea would have been inconceivable, let alone the Democrats being able to legitimately target all 4 seats in Orange County. After all, Orange County is where Richard Nixon was born, where Ronald Reagan conservatism grew up. But the same demographic forces that have been sort of hollowing the Republican Party out across the state are now nibbling at this Republican bastion, and that's because of the demographics. Take this district here, the 39th, there are now more minority voters than white voters, which is why this race has been so interesting to watch. The Republican candidate, young Kim, has had to sort of distance herself from President Trump's, stop the caravan, send the troops to the border, build the wall types of rhetoric. So now the Republicans here in Orange County wait to see whether their conservative bastion is still intact or whether the cracks are beginning to appear here, but it could take a long wait. After all, California has some of the slowest vote counting districts in the country.
More special coverage right here on The National.
You're watching our special coverage of America Votes here on The National. The headline of the night, the Democrats have taken back the House of Representatives and the Republicans have held on to the Senate, which means that Washington tomorrow morning is going to change, and probably in a pretty dramatic way. And our Washington correspondent Keith Bogue is here with us in the studio for some thoughts on what that might be. So how does Donald Trump's job become more difficult? Because it will.
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, this is obviously a big deal, but we shouldn't confuse that to mean that it's an unusual thing. This happens to presidents. And so there is a way to deal with it. They learn how to compromise in order to get their agenda done. We saw that, I think, perhaps more successfully than most with Bill Clinton after he lost both houses in 1994. He went on to compromise with the opposition and sort of lower his sights in terms of what he wanted to achieve and to compromise. But these are the very skills that Donald Trump does not appear to possess. You know, he always wants to talk about big, about how great, how important, how the first ever, the biggest ever. All of that stuff is natural to him. Compromise, making deals, admitting that he can only get half a loaf when he wants one, not so much. So it's going to be a particular test for him because of his personality and his disposition.
And strange because he does think he's a good deal maker. So this will really put him to the test on that front. But politically as well, he'll be under renewed pressure.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, all of the things that he's been able to keep bottled up somewhat because Republicans in their control of the House were reluctant to use their power to hold him accountable for things such as, you know, Russia, his tax returns and so on. All that's gone now. He's in a whole new world, and it could be a world of pain.
Okay, so good times for Donald Trump ahead. Thanks for your help tonight, Keith. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we should let people know as well that Keith will be on Front Burner tomorrow morning. In case you haven't downloaded it yet, that's CBC's new daily news podcast. It gives you an in-depth look at what's happened. And in this case, it'll be all about the midterm. So more of Keith tomorrow morning. You can get it at cbc.ca/frontburner or wherever you get your podcast. Take a listen in the morning. That's The National for this November 6th. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.